In this week in the Italian campaign, brought to you by the Freedom for Italy Second World War History Network. Episode 64, the Canadian Corps' final attack towards the Senio River on the 16th to the 21st of December 1944. By the 15th of December 1944, the 1st Canadian Corps had a salient west of the Lamone River, but Germany's 73rd Corps continued to hold firm on both flanks and deny approaches to the Senio River. Opposite the 5th Armoured Division, the Germans had the natural barrier of the Fosso Munio and a line which ran to the Lamone near Boncellino, west of Russi. The Canadians had entered Bagnacavallo, but the town was still mainly in German hands. Corps Commander Chalres Foulkes decided to bring his left up to the Naviglio south of Bagnacavallo and attack simultaneously over the canal and the Munio to the north to envelop the town. Meanwhile, 5 Corps moving north between the Senio and the Lamone from Faenza, which it captured on the 16th of December, was to weaken German defences to the Canadian left. The Canadians had to cross both the Vecchio and the Naviglio Canal in an area overlooked by both Bagnacavallo and the towering bank of the Senio River less than 2,000 yards west of the Naviglio. To gain surprise, the 1st Brigade in the 1st Division was to reach the Vecchio in a series of advances and then thrust in strength towards the Naviglio, which was dry. The Corps' main effort would follow, with 11th Brigade striking across the Munio, while 2nd Brigade took up the 1st Division's attack south of Bagnacavallo. The inner wings of the Canadian divisions would link up west of the town. At daybreak on the 16th of December, the Royal Canadian Regiment in the 1st Brigade approached the Vecchio immediately south of the railway line, and the 48th Highlanders, also in the 1st Brigade on the left, advanced west from Boncellino to take 2 bridges, as yet unblown, over the canal. Germany's 98th Division was dug in and backed by tanks, artillery and mortars. Demolitions on the roads and tracks leading to the Vecchio held up the Churchills of the 12th Royal Tank supporting the Canadian infantry. At the end of the first day's fighting, the Royal Canadians were still east of the canal, while the Highlanders had only gone 800 yards from Boncellino. By the afternoon of the 17th of December, Canadian 1st Division Commander General Harry Foster decided the incremental approach had failed, and he ordered a full-scale attack on the Vecchio. This went in at 4 o'clock in the morning of the 18th of December. On the right, the Royal Canadians crossed the canal on the rubble of the demolished road bridge, established a foothold on the far bank with 2 companies, but they were driven back by a counterattack involving tanks. The Highlanders seized intact the northerly of the 2 Vecchio bridges, but the Hastings and Prince Edward's regiment struggled to exploit this success. 1 company joined the Highlanders west of the captured bridge, but the armoured cars of the Royal Canadian Dragoons could not get forward in time along a narrow, rain-soaked road. There was no air support due to the bad weather. Shortly before 9 o'clock, a counterattack by tanks and infantry drove the Hastings back over the stream. An hour later, the Germans blew up the bridge, and the action was over. The attempt to break through south of Bagnacavallo having failed, General Foulkes ordered a concentrated attack at the centre of the Corps' front. The 11th Brigade in the 5th Armoured Division was to advance over the Munio on the 19th of December in the sector held by the 12th Brigade. Simultaneously on the left, the 2nd Brigade in the 1st Division would launch an assault between the bend in the Munio and the bridgehead which the 3rd Brigade was holding west of the Naviglio. The 2 attacks would begin in silence, with pre-arranged artillery support to be available. Both the 1st and 3rd Brigades were to stage fire demonstrations, and south of Bagnacavallo, a psychological warfare unit was to broadcast battle noises, simulating an impending assault. The opponents consisted in the main of 3 regiments of the 98th Infantry Division. the 289 Grenadier Regiment in front of the 1st Division, and the 117 and 290 regiments opposite the 5th Armoured Division. And where the 5th Division was to attack, the Munio was 20 foot wide and flanked by dikes 5 feet high. As a preliminary to the 5th Division's attack, the 12th Brigade had previously secured crossing places over the Munio at the bend of the Via Chiara, employing flamethrowers for the first time in Italy. They broke the morale of the defenders, who either threw down their arms or surrendered as prisoners as the Canadians waded across. The 4th Battalion of the Princess Louise Dragoons gained a shallow foothold on the far bank, about 1,000 yards downstream. But an attempt by the Lennox and Renfrews on the 19th of December to extend the bridgehead failed. At 8 o'clock on the evening of the 19th of December, the assaulting battalions of both divisions attacked. The 11th Brigade's units crossed the Munio without mishap. The Irish Regiment of Canada's target was farm buildings on the Via Sant'Antonio. The Perth Regiment was to capture the junction between the Via Chiara and Via Guano, which ran south across the 2nd Brigade's front to Bagnacavallo. The two leading Irish companies had almost reached their first goal when they came under machine gun fire and were forced back to the Munio, where they remained throughout the 20th of December in full view of the Germans and harassed continually by heavy mortaring. The Perths also met stern resistance and withdrew to the Munio. But further attempts were made to reach the Senio. A Perth's company was sent to the Casa della Congregazione farmhouse early in the morning of the 20th of December. Tanks of the 2nd Armoured Regiment moved up to the Munio in the darkness to support another Perth company attack up the Via Chiara, but an arc bridge was found to be at a bad angle and vehicles could not cross the waterway. Armoured bulldozers began filling in the canal, but by the time this crossing was ready, the site was being pounded by German artillery fire. German armour on the west of the Munio was driven off by artillery, and Canadian tanks crossed the waterway under a smoke screen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Perths at Casa della Congregazione were surrounded and under attack. The final German attack around midday was repulsed, and Strathcona tanks rolled into the farmyard at 3:45 in the afternoon. By then, a clearing sky enabled Spitfires to strafe guns and transport on the road to the Senio. On the 1st Division's front, where there were no water obstacles, tree-bordered fields and vineyards restricted tank movements to the roads, which were heavily mined. The division's attack began at 8 o'clock in the evening of the 19th of December on a 1,000-yard front from the Via Chiara to the Via Pozzara. Every farmhouse was fortified. Casa Argelli blocked the embuscades until daylight. Self-propelled guns and tanks gave German infantry strong defensive support. The Princess Patricia's Light Infantry Right-Hand Company, advancing aside the Via Pozzara, bypassed machine gunners in Casa Argelli and captured the junction with the Via Guano. Two companies pushed on towards the Lo Stradello road, but they were pinned down by fire from 3 sides and forced to withdraw. In the afternoon of the 20th of December, a company of the Princess Patricia's with a troop of the British Columbia Dragoons attempted unsuccessfully to reach Lo Stradello. The Edmontons passing through the Patricias at the Via Pozzara cleared the Via Guano, and by last light enough mines had been lifted for the tanks and support weapons to advance. By midnight, the Patricias were on Lo Stradello. The 1st Division had penetrated up to 1,000 yards into German defences, and they were well up with the 5th Division. The German 98th Division had been severely damaged, and a general retirement to the Senio embankments was ordered. By daylight on the 21st of December on the 5th Armoured Division's front, the Irish Regiment of Canada had advanced to the south bank of the Senio. The Cape Breton Highlanders mopped up opposite Fusignano. By midday, the two battalions, supported by anti-tank guns and a squadron of tanks, were on the Senio's high eastern floodbank on a 4,000-yard front. On the 1st Division front, the Seaforth Highlanders passed through the Edmontons and linked up with the Cape Bretons near the Senio. That morning, the Patricias, moving south along the Munio, reached Bagnacavallo, which patrols of the Carl Eaton and Yorks had already entered. By nightfall, the Seaforths had positions which extended the Corps' frontage 3,000 yards south to the Bagnacavallo to Lugo road. On the Canadian left, the Royal Canadians and the Hastings had crossed the Vecchio and Naviglio and were a few hundred yards east of the Senio. But opposite Cotignola, the Germans kept the 48th Highlanders from crossing the Vecchio until late afternoon, and then held firm at the line of the Naviglio. The Canadians had at last reached the Senio, though the Germans still held the dike on the east bank, and the Senio River lay between the 8th Army and its intended start line for the final drive on Bologna. They continued to clear the right flank northeastwards to within a mile of Highway 16, and 5 Corps and the Canadian left wing forced the Germans to the Naviglio. In the first 3 weeks of December, the Canadian Corps had liberated 145 square miles of Italian territory, including Ravenna, and had advanced 9 miles over 3 defended water lines. But the cost had been great. In the 20 days since the offensive had begun on the 2nd of December, the 1st Canadian Corps had suffered more than 2,500 casualties, including men taken prisoner. On the 20th of December, 5 days after the deadline originally set by Harold Alexander for offensive operations to cease in Italy, 15th Army Group Commander Mark Clark notified his army commanders that the time is rapidly approaching when I shall give the signal for a combined all-out attack of 5th and 8th Armies. But on the 26th of December, the German 148 Division, which incorporated elements of the newly formed Fascist Monte Rosa and Italia divisions, struck a sudden blow against the western flank of the 5th Army, which was held by the 92nd Division. By the evening of the 27th of December, the Germans and Italians had penetrated 5 miles down the Serchio Valley. The US 1st Armoured Division and 2 brigades of the 8th Indian Division were moved to the threatened area, and they restored the situation by the end of the month. But the attack, coupled with the German offensive in the Ardennes, which had begun on the 16th of December, shocked Allied commanders. 5th Army Commander Lucien Truscott ordered further postponement of planned operations until the situation in the Serchio Valley was clarified. 8th Army Commander Richard McCreary had already written to Clark requesting a review of the timing of the 2-army attack. He said that the heavy fighting in the first half of December had depleted his ammunition stocks. The probable absence of air support on 2 days out of 3 would increase the demands on the artillery. The 8th Army's capacity to carry on a simultaneous offensive with the Americans had been depleted, and the 5th Army's own shortage of ammunition was also serious. The poor prospects of reaching Bologna were apparent to Alexander. On the 30th of December, he decided to abandon the existing plan and to go on the defensive for the present and to concentrate on making a real success of our spring offensive.